Happy Monday, Dog Nation. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door. We are fully loaded today. Plenty more on the Todd Monken hire, how that offense might look at Georgia. I'll talk about why I think that Jamie Newman, the quarterback, might be a really nice fit for what Monken really wants to do. We'll hear some of the things that Monken has said in the past about his offense on today's show. There is also the report from our own Mike Griffith at DawgNation.com that Georgia is set to make another addition to its football staff in some capacity, with Buster Faulkner most recently as Southern Miss offensive coordinator, but actually pretty long, distinguished list of being offensive coordinators for various group of five programs. Faulkner seems to be a coach to like, and it seems like that he's going to have some sort of role at Georgia here moving forward. We'll try to figure out what all that is about. By the way, our buddy Jon Stinchcomb went to high school with Buster, so he'll tell us more about what he was like kind of growing up and going on a path that has led him to become a pretty interesting coaching name out there. We will do all of that. There is also some recruiting news. It sounds like the visit the five-star quarterback Brock Vandagriff took to Georgia over the weekend went pretty well. We'll tell you the latest on that, too. So we're going to cram a bunch of stuff in there for those of you off today in honor of the MLK holiday. We appreciate you being with us and sharing some of that time with us as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, viewed to be the best.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
It would certainly appear that changes are afoot for Georgia when it comes to its offense. Now, we've already talked about the addition of new quarterback Jamie Newman. More on him in a moment. We've talked a lot about the addition of Todd Monken in the offensive coordinator role. More on that in a moment as well. Later on, in the next couple of minutes, I'm also going to mention a new name in the fold in some capacity. It appears that Buster Faulkner, offensive coordinator at Southern Miss, is on his way to UGA to do something, whether it's an on-field analyst role or an on-field coaching role, or I don't quite know how you figure all this out with Georgia currently at 10 employed coaches, but one way or another, it appears there's some news afloat when it comes to Buster Faulkner. We will get to that here in just a moment. Let me begin, though, with this. I think there's a lot to like about Jamie Newman, the new Georgia quarterback, and a lot you can imagine about how he might pair together with new offensive coordinator Todd Monken that really leads you to believe that this duo may have some real success with each other. Now, I think it's also important here, and you're going to hear me do this a lot. I'm going to push back against the tendency, DawgNation's such a big group of fans, and UGA football is such an interesting topic, and there's such a huge media climate around UGA. There's going to be a tendency over the course of the next few months to turn Jamie Newman into the next Joe Burrow and turn Todd Monken into the next Joe Brady. Obviously, I think UGA fans have every right to be quite optimistic about both the new coordinator and the new quarterback. But around here, we're going to kind of do our part to kind of, push back against some of the overwhelming hype that's going to eventually grow around these two guys. We're going to push back against that a little bit, but at the same time, point out some evidence and some reasons why, feeling like the Georgia offense has a chance to be pretty good next season. There are lots of potential reasons to justify that. Let me give you an example here, kind of three stats that I think are really interesting about new quarterback Jamie Newman. And I got this on Twitter from CFB Film Room. They got the data from Sports Info Solutions, which is a group that supplies some data and some stuff for the College Football Playoff Selection Committee, kind of a serious data group out there. CFB Film Room put this out on Twitter regarding Jamie Newman. Now, I haven't checked their math. I don't know if this is right or not. But certainly we'll take their word for that. And if you want to start thinking about how this quarterback pairs with this offensive coordinator, these three stats in particular are three pretty strong reasons why it might be pretty good for Newman here at Georgia working with Todd Monken. Listen to this. First of all, 38% of the passes that Newman threw last season traveled at least 10 yards downfield. This is a guy that's putting the ball in the air, and he's putting it, somewhat deep. But look at the completion percentages on all these, or what they call the on-target rate. Receiver having a chance to catch it, whether he hauled it in or not. 69.1% on target rate on throws 10 or plus more yards downfield. That was 10th best in the nation. And listen to this one. On throws of 20 or more yards down the field, 66.7% on target rate. 5th best in the nation for a Newman on those deep throws down the field. Now listen. That is exactly what Georgia needs. And I think you can make the case exactly what Georgia has been missing. That ability to really make defenses pay for their desire to stop the run. They crowd that box, they crowd that line of scrimmage looking to take away the run. The opposing offense, you got to make the defense pay for doing that. And for someone like Newman, who's been good on deep throws down the field, you certainly can imagine him having some great success there. Now, I know you've heard a bunch of other stuff about Newman as well in terms of stats this and stats that. For instance, I think Pro Football Focus is calling him like the third best returning quarterback in all the country or whatever else. This is also a group that a year ago said very similar things about Jarrett Garantano at Tennessee. So be very careful about some of the stuff that you see out there when it comes to Jamie Newman. But in this particular instance, the idea of being accurate on throws deep down the field, I've got no reason to dispute those stats. And if that's true, that's the kind of thing that's going to work out really well and pair really well with what Todd Monken wants to do. And in fact, when Monken got the job in Cleveland, now he wasn't play caller for the Browns last year. By now, you probably are very well aware of that. But when he was hired as an offensive coordinator with the Cleveland Browns to work underneath Freddie Kitchen, who was the play caller, Monken talked a little bit about his philosophy. And the one thing that kind of comes up, and I think this mostly comes up because of the time that he spent with Mike Gundy to Oklahoma State, is the notion of the air raid offense, the notion of kind of what we've seen from a lot of these Big 12 teams. And that's one of the reasons why when I hear, hey, Jamie Newman's been really accurate on deep throws down the field, given what I remember working with quarterbacks like Brandon Weeden and others there at Oklahoma State, well, that seems kind of perfect for the Todd Monken offense, even if it isn't quite air raid type stuff. Monken, when he was hired in Cleveland, the Browns have given us permission to use this. Monken, when he was hired in Cleveland, went into a little bit more detail about what his offense is all about and kind of what he views it as, what some people call an air raid. He might be a little bit more descriptive in his own language in terms of what it's all about. Here's what Monken said upon being hired by the Cleveland Browns.
It's interesting, when I went to Oklahoma State from Jacksonville, and it was the air raid, as we use our fingers to say that, but it's really what I took away from it was being able to throw to win. That really, to me, was the air raid. You had a certain amount of run game, ran a lot of the same concepts, and you could throw to win. That was really it. Like any offense, it works a lot better if you have good players. That's really what it's about. It's about having good players and doing things the right way consistently, so you do it better than they do it. Becomes a lot harder at the NFL level because you're going against the best in the world, and windows are tighter, and you're under duress a lot more, so you've got to be disciplined in terms of what you do on the perimeter.
All right, so we got news fast and furious coming in here. Georgia has weighed in on the Buster Faulkner situation. I'm going to hold off on that for 1 second, just going to stay on the flow of this. But coming up in a couple of minutes, for those of you watching live on video, we will tell you what Georgia has said about the DawgNation report that Buster Faulkner, most recently Southern Miss offensive coordinator, is on his way to UGA. We will get that coming up in a moment. But for now, I don't want to lose the flow on what we're doing in terms of talking about Todd Monken. And you heard Monken there say a phrase that I hope it jumped out to you as much as it jumps out to me. And by the way, the Buster Faulkner stuff that we'll get more into in a moment, this all ties in really well with all of this too. He says, here's my belief. You've got to be able to throw to win. Now, that's a very modern football phrase, and frankly, not the kind of thing that we would have necessarily heard around Georgia much of the last couple of years. We've been told for the last couple of years around here at UGA that you've got to keep chopping to win. You've got to run to win. And I understand where Kirby, I think, misunderstands stats sometimes in football that would lead you to believe that sometimes maybe running to win is maybe more important than it actually is, more of a situation where winning teams run than it is that running teams win. But nonetheless, the notion of you got to keep chopping wood and keep staying stubborn with that run, you got to keep doing that, and ultimately if you want to win, that's kind of the way that goes down. And Todd Monken, I think, no better example of the new philosophy he's going to bring to Georgia. I don't think that's embodied, it could not be embodied any better than it is with the idea of you've got to throw if you want to be able to win. And if you want to kind of match that philosophy with some other guys, Kyle Shanahan, the San Francisco 49ers coach, we just saw that team make its way to the Super Bowl yesterday by winning the NFC Championship. He's recently kind of said some of those same kind of things. And by the way, that's a team that runs the ball like crazy, that ran all over the Green Bay Packers yesterday. But Shanahan's kind of explained in the past that the ability to run, the opportunity to run is really set up by the pass. The old notion of, hey, run sets up the pass, and modern football, it's more of a thing of the pass sets up the run. And an example of that is kind of explained there by Todd Monken of, if you want to be able to win, you've got to be able to throw to do that. We want to be the kind of team that throws the ball, that sets ourselves up for victory. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have a quarterback that is also able to complete deep throws down the field, be explosive. We've kind of read some of those quotes from Monken here before about his desire for more explosive plays. Now, one needs more 5-yard plays. You got to have more explosive plays. And a quarterback like Jamie Newman, which has apparently been a pretty accurate guy when it comes to throwing the ball 10-plus yards down the field, 20-plus yards down the field. This would seem like the kind of quarterback that Monken could have some great success with. Now, listen, when it comes to being excited about the Todd Monken era, I am certainly that. However, I have also said that while I want him to bring about some changes to Georgia, I don't want to change everything about the way that Georgia goes about its business. Buying into the notion of you throw to win, I can get behind that a little bit. But I don't want to see Georgia completely abandon the run. I still want there to be some balance when it comes to what's going on there at UGA. Once again, we'll go back to Todd Monken's introductory press conference with the Cleveland Browns, and he also kind of touched on that notion of, hey, this is what balance means to me, and this is kind of what you can expect. And the good news is, as Monken explains, there is still a place for running the ball when it comes to all of that. Here's Todd Monken again.
I think balance is multiple skill players touching the football. To me, it's not always just run pass. It's, do you have enough skill players where they can touch the football? Last year at Tampa, we almost had 6 guys, if OJ doesn't get hurt, of 700-plus yards from line of scrimmage. Well, to me, that's balance. You have a number of guys that can hurt you from a matchup standpoint. Is running the football important? Sure, because in order to win, you've got to be explosive and not turning the ball over. How do you become explosive space players and throwing it over their head or throwing intermediate pockets, and running the football adds to that?
No, I mean, listen, I like all about that. You know, the idea that Georgia's still going to try to run the football, utilizing guys like Zamir White, Kendall Milton on his way, maybe finally that really impressive role where James Cook can flourish. You like all of that, but understanding the pass probably sets that up in the modern game more so than the opposite. There's a lot of stats in the NFL of play action pass and all that kind of stuff that's really, really effective, that you actually don't need to establish the run to let play action pass work for you. You just got to be able to execute that well, and the more that you throw effectively, the more that running lanes will open up over time, and it certainly seems like Todd Monken buys into that. In fact, his track record, as he specifically cited, going back to the Tampa Bay Bucs in 2018, is an example of that balance, not just between the run and the pass, but getting multiple playmakers involved and finding bigger stat opportunities and big play opportunities for more guys as a part of the Georgia offense. If we kind of take that quote in Cleveland and apply it to what might happen in UGA, once again, I think that feels like a really fun and a really nice thing. One more from him. He was also asked, having spent some time in college as head coach at Southern Miss, ironically, we're talking about the Golden Eagles again today here in a moment, and kind of also offensive coordinator at Oklahoma State, going back to the NFL last year with the Cleveland Browns. You know, what does he like about college? How is it different than the NFL? Also kind of an interesting answer from Todd Monken on that when he took that Browns job at the beginning of last season. Here is more from Todd Monken.
But your rewards you get in the NFL is different than the rewards you get in college. The winning is the same, but the developing of younger people and what you get out of college coaching, the same things that you get out of the reward you get is the same things that wear you out, just like your own children. The same things that you get the reward from your own children is the same thing that wears you out. So it's a little bit more difficult in that regard. But the rewards you get out of the NFL is doing it against the best in the world, and your margin for error is so much smaller.
I mean, listen, the thing I like about that quote is I love guys who are attracted to the chess match of the NFL. And yes, I know there's a way in which NFL football is just easier because it doesn't require as much of your time in terms of recruiting and impressing 17 and 18-year-old young men. And that's kind of a turnoff for some people. I totally get that. But the notion that the NFL provides that opportunity to go up against the best defensive minds and find a way to win that chess match, find a way to, draw something up on a chalkboard that befuddles the defensive coordinators you're dealing with, that's the kind of diabolical mind that you're looking to see Georgia bring in. And that's what I believe that Georgia's brought in with Todd Monken. Do I want him to change everything about UGA? No, I don't. I don't believe that he will. But do I think, based on the way that this season ended, and frankly some of 2018 as well, do I think that it shows that Georgia needs some changes? I think that it does, and I think Monken may be just the right guy to provide that. And the quarterback he's going to have a chance to tinker with, Jamie Newman, based on some of the things that he's shown at Wake Forest, that might be a pretty good quarterback for Todd Monken to put all this offense around at least for a year. And the results, well, they could be quite fun to watch. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Pella Window and Door of Georgia. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. We're not on the radio today. We'll be back on 960 The Ref again tomorrow after the King holiday. Are available video live, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter at 10, just like every other morning. Podcast, of course, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. Really glad to have you with us, and we really appreciate our friends at Pella Window and Door of Georgia for making it all possible. I do want to make you aware of this, that Pella Window and Door of Georgia also has a great offer for you all right now, and I want you to know about this. Bigger and better than it's been before, you can currently get 50% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for 48 months. That offer is valid through March 12th, so make sure you check that out. They offer the best lifetime warranty, top-of-the-line equipment, really unparalleled expertise. They are a locally owned branch right here in Georgia, which means you get that kind of family service that you've come to expect. Really, really good stuff, and there are a couple of different ways for you to get in touch. Website, keep this one in mind, PellaBranch.com. That's PellaBranch.com, or give them a call in their Dunwoody showroom, just right down the road from where we do the show every day. 404-445-2979. That's 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia is viewed to be the best. All right, I was going to do some recruiting stuff here as we go around the doghouse. I'm going to save that for a little bit later on and just deal with the Buster Faulkner stuff. Let me show you what Mike Griffith from DawgNation.com had written this morning on the Faulkner story. Most recently, Southern Miss offensive coordinator. Here is what Mike wrote this morning. Georgia football has hired Buster Faulkner to work with its quarterbacks and its offensive staff. DawgNation has learned. UGA has yet to confirm or indicate how Faulkner's addition may or may not affect the current coaches believed to be on staff. So at the time, we knew that Faulkner was coming in, or Mike knew that Faulkner was coming in, but we're not really clear on the capacity. Well, Georgia has, since we've gone on the air, weighed in on the Buster Faulkner news, and Georgia is calling Faulkner's role at Georgia an offensive quality control position. Offensive quality control position that puts him in that kind of analyst spot that guys like, I guess, Jay Johnson have been in, Sean Watson's been in, but according to this title, not an on-field coach. So an analyst role is the position for Buster Faulkner here. Although Faulkner's resume in coaching is certainly pretty deep. As I said before, most recently Southern Miss offensive coordinator. Before that, offensive coordinator at Arkansas State. And before that, offensive coordinator at Middle Tennessee State University. These are all pretty big-time Group of 5 schools in various years, pretty successful at that, and Faulkner's had some success in those offenses. This is a guy that would have crossed paths with Kirby Smart, I guess, briefly, when Faulkner was quarterback at Valdosta State, and Smart was working there in 2000 and 2001. And then after that, Faulkner was on his way to a pretty impressive coaching career. He was also the quarterback for the state championship team at Parkview High School back in 1997. And you know who else was on that team? Our buddy Jon Stinchcomb, who would also go on to a pretty impressive career in football. So we're going to get Jon on the phone. We'll let him tell us what it was like to grow up with Buster Faulkner and what kind of football mind that he's shown in that age. And Jon will also get a chance to kind of weigh in on the changes that seem to be on the way here for the Georgia offense by adding Faulkner as a analyst type person, by bringing in Todd Monken as offensive coordinator, by reshuffling the responsibilities of some other coaches. It's pretty clear that Smart is looking to make an emphatic answer to some offensive concerns that Georgia obviously had during the 2019 season. So this is definitely an interestingly presented today by our friends at Pella Window and Door. Hope you enjoy Jon Stinchcomb right now.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
So just to be clear, once again, if you're just joining us on video, Georgia has made an addition to its staff, and they are calling it a quality control position, an offensive staff quality control position. That is not an on-field coaching role. That is an analyst role. And a lot of these big-time SEC programs in recent years have certainly utilized that analyst role to great effect. His name is Buster Faulkner. He has most recently been the offensive coordinator at Southern Miss, and as I said before, he just so happened to be a high school teammate of our buddy Jon Stinchcomb, who is good enough to join us here again today on DawgNation Daily. Jon, first of all, happy Monday to you. We appreciate you being with us back here again, and hope you had a great weekend. You doing well today?
Great. Trying to recover from a 10-year-old birthday party / sleepover. So I'm actually glad to talk about something other than Harry Potter and fart jokes. So thanks for having me on, BA.
With that said, we will dive into it here. So Georgia's hired Buster Faulkner in kind of an analyst role. This is a guy with a pretty deep coaching resume, though. Offensive coordinator at multiple spots. Some of those offenses have really done pretty well. This seems to be a coaching name on the rise, a real coup for Georgia to be able to get him in an analyst position, as it has been explained by UGA. As we said before, it just so happens that he was a high school teammate of yours, bringing glory to a Lilburn with a state championship there in Parkview in 1997. How well do you remember Buster Faulkner? And I guess what can you just tell us about him, having played on the same high school team that he did?
Oh, I remember Buster well in that, there's this freshman quarterback who, is playing JV. We have Jeremy Myers, who's from the long line of Myers brothers, whose older brother Jeff played at Wake Forest. His brother John was at Georgia Tech. Jeremy would go on to play at Georgia Tech. And Jeremy's our starting quarterback, and we realize he doesn't have anybody to throw it to. So halfway through the season, we hand the ball over to Buster, and he becomes our starting quarterback. Jeremy Myers becomes our star wide receiver, and Buster leads us to a state championship, first in school history, and goes on to win a number more. I think he goes the next 3 years undefeated with the help of Jeff Francoeur, and 3 more state titles. So he's a champion on the field, and he had good success in Valdosta State as a player. But I just remember and know him personally as somebody who's he's hardworking. He's a good guy. I root for him, and I like this hire on a unconnected, unbiased format, just because you just brought someone in with experience with the NFL ranks, who knows what it looks like when you have some of the elite athletes on this planet playing for you. And I think Buster comes from a background where you have to create a little more opportunities because you might not have that same level of talent. So I think this new role for him is a great compliment to Coach Monken being hired and the rest of the staff. And if you look at the way these programs are rolling, Alabama, for example, Georgia in these past few years, there's so much attrition in the coaching staff ranks just because they're getting hired from other schools, that I think it really bodes well for Buster that he gets to learn, quote-unquote, the Georgia way, and possibly a grooming opportunity for him for something a little bit bigger and brighter down the road.
I obviously want to talk to you more about Todd Monken in a moment, who you mentioned, but you also said something interesting there in discussing Faulkner, which I wanted to ask you about too. Having spent a lot of time around football, college level, certainly elite high school level, NFL level, when it comes to these guys who become coaches, that's not typically a passive career choice, is it? In other words, you don't decide late in life to sort of get into that because it seems like a good gig. It's one of those things that you, at least for a lot of these guys, they end up doing it because they can't imagine doing something different. They just love the process of football too much. They love the dedication required to, kind of conceive these game plans. These coaches are sort of formed pretty early a lot of times, are they not?
No doubt, and it's got to be in your DNA. I think college football is the great equalizer, and it'll weed folks out pretty quick. You can spend a couple, 2-3 years figuring out that being on the road and recruiting 16 and 17-year-olds across the country can be pretty exhausting. And some people thrive in that environment, and they love the game enough and love that aspect of the game to want to stay in college football ranks, but it takes special individuals, and it speaks volumes to me that Buster has had the pedigree and put together the string of coaching jobs, both as an offensive coordinator and other various assistant coaching roles. That I really like this hire. I think it's am I biased? I know Buster. Yes, I am, but from an unbiased perspective, I like the fact that Coach Smart knows him personally. He's been in at least the same on the same team as he has in various roles, and knows the type work ethic and character that he brings to the program. And I think that says something in and of itself.
Before you joined us, we heard some of the things that Todd Monken had said when he first took the Cleveland Browns job, and question about the air raid offense. That's one of those words that kind of gets people's attention. And in the audio that we played on the show, John, he said, well, maybe I'm not quite so much air raid the way you think about it, but I do like the idea of throwing to win. We want to be able to throw to win. That notion in and of itself, John, is something that I welcome at Georgia. Not because I want to see Georgia stopping running the football. I think you still got to be able to run it. But I do believe in the modern game, the fear that you strike in opposing defenses because you can throw it, I think makes it easier to run. I look at Joe Burrow and his success as a running quarterback this year. I think that he's running for a lot of yards because there was a lot of open space in the middle of the field because of how petrified opposing defenses were of the LSU pass-catching targets. And I think that for Georgia, even if it brings in a version of that, throwing to win, to open things up for the other running backs, and I guess with a dual-threat quarterback like Newman, even an opportunity for him to run as well, I think this is a good kind of change for Georgia. How do you feel about it?
Well, you look back and think the air raid was almost revolutionary because of the style of football that was being played throughout the country, and it contrasted so brightly because of how much they threw it and the spacing of that offense. Well, that's become the norm. I mean, the spacing on the field, vertically, horizontally, that's the way teams play now. So the air raid, I think, grew that moniker just because of the contrast of what else was out there. And now, the way I see the game, it would fall much more in line with what we've grown accustomed to across the country, especially in college football, in that you're trying to attack defenses with 6 weapons. Usually it's 3 wide receivers, a tight end, a running back, and now the quarterback has become a threat. And I think that complements really well with bringing in a guy like Newman, who can be that threat, a dual threat, not just a running quarterback and not just a pocket passer, but has scramble ability and has ability to extend plays and work guys open. So I think it comes at a really good time, and with the experience Monken has with, you look at his track record, and he knows how to move a football down the field and utilize his pieces. I think that's a very welcomed addition to this offensive staff of just recognizing guys' talents and maximizing them. I think back to playing under Coach Payton and then watching him year in and year out with New Orleans. One of the best things that they do is recognize a guy's individual skill set and maximize it. It doesn't exactly have to fit the current system. They'll mold the system into fitting the personnel and build packages around them to attack defense. So I'm excited about what he could bring to the table and getting, a better, and this is going to sound critical, but I think it's probably deserved after this year, a better maximization of the talent that we have in Athens on the offensive side of the ball.
So I'm a big believer in life. There's no free lunch, right? Getting better at one thing is going to cost you something somewhere. So to be fair and balanced here for a moment, and I think that you're a good person to ask this to because of your history as an offensive lineman, will it now be harder for Georgia to be physical knowing that it's kind of bringing an offensive coordinator who, by his own admission, is a throw-to-win type of guy? In other words, let's say that Georgia's up 10 points with 10 minutes to go. When you have the football in those situations, at that point in time, I don't know that you necessarily want to throw to win quite as much anymore. You want to, run the ball and chew up clock and, kind of things like that. When you have the ball late with a lead, you want to kind of choke the life out of your opponent. Is there a trade-off here? Does that now get more difficult with what might be a thinner, leaner, more pass-protecting offensive line? How does all of that change now with what would seem to be a pretty stark contrast in offensive philosophies of the new OC compared to what has been in Athens before?
Well, I look at it, and it's been a mismatch for me for at least the past couple of years of, we go after really big offensive linemen that can punish defensive fronts, and then we get in personnel groupings and formations that space defenses out and create space. So you've got a personnel profile for an offensive line to put a defense in a phone booth and pound on them, And then situationally, you move away from that and putting out different personnel groupings and different play calls that almost minimizes the effect of the benefit that you gain from having those huge bodies lined up next to each other. So I think it's going to mesh well. There are teams currently, and I think that's the profile that we need to look at, that don't have massive offensive lines that still are able to, run their 4-minute offense. That's the offense that an offense can run at the end of the game when you have the lead to control the ball and keep it out of the other team's hands to get that possession back. So I think that's the direction the game of football is moving towards.
Let me finish up with this. For me, I think it's somewhat impressive that Smart, given the fact they have won the East 3 years in a row, that they have been to a national championship game, and that for the most part, the results that Smart has accrued here at UGA have been really, really good. I think the fact that Smart would put that at risk to go out and try to get what might prove to be better, but at the same time, when you take a risk, there's also the other side of that coin that trying to be more explosive, trying to be a little bit more pass-oriented might backfire. It might lead to results that aren't quite as good as what it has been the last couple of years for Georgia, but you'll never know unless you risk it, and certainly it opens up the possibility that things could be better than they've even been before. John, I guess my point here is I think all of this says something kind of nice about Smart, that he's willing to kind of put himself at risk and not sit back completely on his laurels and try to obtain what UGA hasn't yet obtained. I think that says something nice about Smart, whether this works out to the degree all of us want to or not. What do you think it says about him that he's willing to keep pushing the envelope, and in this case, maybe even going so far as to take a step towards reinventing what has, for the most part, worked pretty well for Georgia?
Well, I think we use experience as the great teacher, and there was an article written in ESPN about Les Miles and Nick Saban and how they were at a somewhat similar point not too long ago, and Saban chose to kind of open things up and be willing to try something what was considered experimental on offense, and it paid dividends, and Coach Miles stuck with the more traditional of what he knew, and it seems like the game kind of passed him by, and that would be one aspect that I think Coach Smart has done a good job of embracing, especially with these moves. We'll see how it plays out on the field. The other thing is you look at LSU currently, and they add an offensive piece in the coaching staff with Joe Brady, somebody who sees the game with new eyes, if you will, and brings a new take on things, but doesn't just turn it over to him. I mean, they match him with one of the vets in the game, with Steve Emsminger. I'm probably butchering his last name, but you can bear with me.
No, I think it's it.
And so they complement one another. Well, that's not that Monken is the unproven commodity that Joe was, but you have that blend, the blend of having various coordinators and folks with the experience of putting together game plans work with one another, and it seems to work. Now, it's all about finding the right chemistry, and that's the blueprint that Coach Smart's using, because it's proven to be an effective one for other programs.
Well, John, I tell you what, we love getting your thoughts on all this. I think it's a really fun time to be around the Georgia program. There's so many exciting new things happening. It seems like new news coming out every single day. So it's fun to be able to get your thoughts on that. We appreciate you sharing them with us here. We'll look forward to getting a chance to speak to you here on our program again soon, and hope you have a great week.
Hey, I look forward to it, BA, and it's always great to be a Georgia Bulldog. So go Dogs.
That's exactly right, John. Thanks so much.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I guess also happy to be able to give John a little bit of a break from the spend the night party stuff. That can always be a little bit of a challenge. Thankfully, my kids aren't quite old enough yet for the spend the night parties. They don't really want to do that. Somehow, that doesn't feel like something I want to play much of a home game on by the time that starts happening. The idea of having a bunch of kids in addition to my own inside the house, That does not sound all that enjoyable. But what does sound enjoyable is taking a cruise around the SEC, courtesy of our friends at Royal Caribbean. It could very well be that John needs a vacation right now. I know many of you do there as well. And there's really no better recommendation I can make other than our friends at Royal Caribbean, because in addition to all the cool places that you go, what happens on the ship is really pretty amazing, kind of redefining what a bold vacation's all about, with incredible industry standard setting, dazzling full-scale productions, great entertainment, whether it be Tony Award-winning Broadway musicals, the dive shows, the aqua theater shows, and the Oasis class ships, where you have like those Olympic-style divers like jumping high in the air and landing in the water on a ship that is moving. That is not as easy as it sounds, I can promise you that. You got performance drone shows, ice skating shows. It's really, it's an amazing thing all the way around. Incredible nightclub stuff there as well, whether it be Playmaker Sports Bar and Arcade, you got the Casino Royale, you got all kinds of like live music. There's just no shortage of options to entertain you and your family. So jump out there and do what you need to do, which is get on vacation and make the boldest choice you can make with a Royal Caribbean cruise. Either contact your own travel professional, or let you get in touch with my friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. You can call them 800-326-4971. Let me give you that number once again for the Cruise and Vacation Authority. It's 800-326-4971, and let them know you heard about them right here on DawgNation Daily. All right, a couple of SEC through stories to get to today as we go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. First of all, well wishes to former UGA defensive back Otis Reese, who announced this week that he's on his way to Ole Miss. Reese is one of those guys that I think can certainly have a nice home in college football. I think he kind of fell prey here at UGA, just the overall depth of the roster. I've said this a million times before, that just because a guy isn't playing a ton doesn't mean he's not a good player. In Georgia's case, they weren't substituting at safety a lot. It seemed like Lewis Seen came in the year behind Reese, and it seems like Seen made a big name for himself pretty quickly. So I don't have a bad word to say about Reese. I don't think UGA fans should have anything bad to say about him either. And I think there's a chance that we still hear from him as a pretty good football player in the SEC, but for maybe a number of reasons, including maybe not quite finding that perfect position fit, it just wasn't working out for Reese here at UGA. To me, this is what the transfer portal is supposed to be for. There are lots of moments in which transfers happen where I'm like, I don't know, if I can get behind this. The notion of Reese coming into Georgia, giving it his best shot, and maybe deciding his best chance to play was somewhere else, how can you fault him for that? I've kind of grown sour of the transfer portal, but in Reese's case, I got no beef with him taking advantage of that. Speaking of transfers, there is another potential high-profile transfer out there, and that's Felipe Franks, the former Florida quarterback. Now, you can kind of joke and say what you will about Franks' time in Gainesville. It was not a distinguished era. I can certainly agree with you on that. However, given the fact that he's played a good bit, he will be very attractive somewhere. And that somewhere, there's certainly a lot of folks up in the northwest corner of the state of Arkansas who think that somewhere might be there in Fayetteville as part of Sam Pittman's first team. Obviously, you got Kendall Browse there as offensive coordinator. They want a quarterback they can work with. Franks recently took a long visit there to Fayetteville and had some nice things to say about that. I think this one's probably not quite over with yet, but it certainly sounds like there's a nice relationship brewing between Franks and Arkansas. Funny to think that Pittman might be coaching Felipe Franks as his quarterback, just given the fact they were once rivals in the Gator Hater cocktail party rivalry. But college football can be a strange sport from time to time, and so we'll kind of watch this one. Another story that's been a little bit strange, but I guess now officially over and done. Jay Hardy was a four-star defensive lineman, and at one point in time, we talked about him even in connection to Georgia. Georgia obviously kind of cast a wide net for defensive linemen for a while. He was from Chattanooga, so the fact that he initially committed to Auburn out of the state of Tennessee was actually a pretty big loss for Jeremy Pruitt. However, and the honest truth is, I wasn't really quite aware of all of this backstory because I just moved on and started thinking about other things. But I guess Hardy never officially announced a signing with Auburn, and Auburn never tweeted that out either. Well, there was some reporting from one of the Tennessee sites this weekend that indeed Hardy had signed with Auburn back in December, and I guess was kind of waiting like a lot of guys are, a few guys are anyway, to make that announcement official in December, or I should say in February. Now, the reason why I guess the reporting comes out on this is I think there were some Tennessee folks who were wondering if there was still a chance to kind of get in on him the same way that people are trying to still get in on Broderick Jones and Cedric Von Braun, and with maybe Georgia's still trying to get in on like Alex Huntley, and maybe you've even threw some overtures out there in the direction of Jordan Burch. If a guy's not signed, then obviously certain programs are going to try to see if there's something they can do to change the player's mind about a commitment. But the Tennessee reporters are saying no, Hardy did indeed sign with Auburn. So this high-profile recruitment between Auburn and Tennessee for the 4-star defensive lineman would appear to be over, and Hardy is now officially on his way to Auburn. In fact, I think Auburn has now tweeted this out to make the announcement that it's indeed happening. There was also kind of a weird report this weekend involving Derek King in Miami. Manny Navarro, who has covered Miami football and recruiting for a while, says that King is coming to Miami. He's going to start classes there on Tuesday. Within the last 24 hours, King has kind of pushed back on that, telling other reporters that he has not made up his mind where he wants to go. Still considering, we mentioned Arkansas before. I guess he's still considering them, still considering LSU, maybe still considering a number of spots. So you may have seen it reported that King is going to Miami, and he very well may end up there. But King himself has kind of pushed back on that. Maybe that's because he wanted to make his own announcement on his own terms, or maybe because the Miami side kind of jumped the gun on saying this was a done deal. I think you probably know this, though. If King were to choose Miami, that would be, I believe, a huge upset in all of this, just given the fact that I think he's one of the more high-profile transfer quarterbacks out there, and the kind of quarterback that could potentially make the team that he chooses a contender again. Miami, that's probably not going to happen, just given what a mess that program is. That's why it'd be such a surprise if he indeed chose there. So the Miami folks seem to think, reporters near the Miami program seem to think they know something on this. King himself is pushing back on that. We'll follow this and see where it goes. Be a big, big surprise if he doesn't land at a more high-profile program closer to being a contender. But listen, I guess strange things can happen from time to time. Maybe that's where that goes down. We'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Pella Window and Door of Georgia, I want to take care of a couple of other stories here just for a moment. One that I'd planned on getting into a little earlier today and just didn't have time to, just given the Buster Faulkner news, which if you're just joining us on video, Faulkner has been announced by Georgia as a quality control analyst, or I guess that's where he shows up on the GeorgiaDogs.com, which is the official site. They do list him as a staffer, and they list him there in that capacity. So from that standpoint, that's about as official as it's going to get for Georgia when it comes to Faulkner, and we'll kind of continue to follow that story to see if there's any more developments on that. But that's Georgia's word on this, at least for now. So that popped up a little earlier, and it did not give us a chance to mention the fact that apparently Brock Vandagriff, the 5-star quarterback, had a very pleasant visit to Georgia this weekend, so much so that according to our own Jeff Sintel, Vandagriff is planning on going back. Here is what Jeff Sintel wrote over the weekend at DawgNation.com. You need to read the full story because I think this is definitely one worth watching. Jeff says the 5-star quarterback's going to be back in Athens on Monday. That's today. He's going to have his family in tow too, Jeff says. Vandagriff told DawgNation that he's down to Auburn, South Carolina, and Georgia. So a final 3 of the Gamecocks and the Tigers and the Dogs for Vandagriff, but these multiple visits to UGA will certainly get a lot of attention. And I don't have to tell you how I feel about this. At this point in time, I think I've been pretty clear. If you can get Vandagriff, you definitely do that. I think he's a very impressive player. I've been watching a little bit more of his highlights just because of the fact that he recently decommitted from Oklahoma and seemed to be more on the board. I like what I see with him. I also like Caleb Williams as well, but right now Georgia seems to be a little bit more of a little less than an arm's length distance away from Vandagriff, and this seems to be one that could be won by Georgia sooner rather than later. I think Georgia should do everything it can to push this one across the goal line and take the win here on this. Shake Caleb Williams' hand, say we wish you well, but this one seems to be Georgia in pretty good shape for Brock Vandagriff. It doesn't mean that we wouldn't welcome a Caleb Williams eventual commitment to UGA as well. But the fact that Vandagriff has grown as close to Georgia as fast as he has, I think we take that on this show as being a very good thing. We'll obviously follow more from Jeff Sintel on that at the forum at forum.dawgnation.com. And, of course, like that story appeared at dawgnation.com. But back-to-back visits here for Brock Vandagriff, the 5-star quarterback. And given the Todd Monken hire, the fact that Buster Faulkner is going to be working as an analyst in kind of that offensive role, a guy that he himself has a bit of a history of being an offensive coordinator. That's a lot of former OCs currently working at Georgia. and an aggressive attempt to upgrade the offense, I think for UGA is a very good thing. The fact that a guy like Vandegrift, a 5-star quarterback for the class of 2021, has also noticed that, I think that's a really good thing too. Speaking of good things, how about this from McCole Hardman from the Kansas City Chiefs? A chance to kind of keep a pretty impressive streak for Georgia alive of sending players to the Super Bowl. Is it 19 years in a row that Georgia sent a player to the Super Bowl? That's actually a really, really cool thing. And yesterday after the game, AFC Championship, Hardman had a nice message for all the fans of Kansas City and everything else that the Chiefs Twitter account kind of caught up on. Here is Hardman enjoying himself there on the field at Arrowhead Stadium.
Hey, man, we Super Bowl bound, baby. I'm telling you, we're not done yet. Hey, Chiefs Kingdom, we love y'all. We're going to bring that thing back home. Let's go.
Boy, I tell you, I love to see him so happy. And it's just cool to think, rookie year in the NFL, I mean, listen, there are a lot of guys, you can play an entire career and never get a chance to enjoy the moment that Hardman gets a chance to enjoy as a rookie in the National Football League. Really cool for him. And then before the game, I'm sure many of you saw this as well, much like last week, Hardman showed up in the stadium in style this week, coming in looking like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, kind of a nice throwback there, very accurate with his costume representation. This was obviously a big deal on social media yesterday. I guess also for a young man from Elbert County, Georgia, who doesn't get very cold in the winter, the fact that he can walk into Arrowhead Stadium in short sleeves like that, keeping the costume alive, for those of you watching on video, you can obviously see this. That's actually pretty impressive chops in cold weather for a young man who, listen, around the Granite Bowl, it did not get that cold before games on Friday night. So good job by McCole Hardman on all of that. One more thing before we wrap up on a decidedly less happy note. What happened to Georgia basketball in Starkville this weekend? Only about a 5.5-point underdog before the game, yet lost by more than 30 points. Listen, the SEC as a league is a little deeper than it used to be. Certainly there's been a push to upgrade basketball. For the most part, that's happened. Mississippi State's the perfect example of that. Ben Allen's a coach that's been to Final Fours. They play a physical brand, and they certainly out-physical Georgia, I think, in this game on Saturday night. But, I mean, this flies below the radar because obviously a lot of Georgia fans are way more focused on football than they are basketball. I certainly get that. But you should know that coming into this game, while Joe Lunardi, the ESPN bracket expert, did not have UGA in his current field, he had them as one of the next 4 out, so essentially like the 6th team out of the tournament. Jerry Palm from CBS Sports actually had Georgia in his tournament field going into this game, and yet Georgia just completely dominated on the road against Mississippi State. This is a losable game. I certainly will grant you that. But surprising that Georgia wasn't able to be more competitive than it was against Mississippi State on Saturday night. And frankly, a real lost opportunity for a team that you'd love to see be able to build some momentum. It is just really, really difficult to tell how much better Georgia is getting. You know, they play well against a Memphis team that's also young, play well in a second half against Michigan State in a game that was already decided. You know, go on the road and really get it handed to them now a couple of times. Is this team getting better? Is this team improving? They very well might be. It's just kind of hard to tell. So a pretty disappointing moment for Georgia, not able to turn what was a nice win against Tennessee into any real momentum, and a real opportunity loss when it comes to a team that had a little bit of a fledgling chance of making the NCAA tournament. And, of course, the season for Georgia is far from done. They're going to have more opportunities, but this is one of those games you'd like to see Georgia be able to put something together on the road and kind of build some momentum now that we're kind of getting into that time of year that ought to be able to be dominated by Georgia basketball. But a little disappointing there Saturday night for the Georgia basketball team. I'll also remind you of this, that it's been a long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. Our buddy Eddie, who's on the desk with us every single day, he really likes that. 1,178 days. That's how long it's been since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. How much fun is that to be able to say on a Monday here? We really appreciate you being a part of it. Big news. Keep following what's going down with Buster Faulkner. They're at DawgNation.com. You can read a whole lot more about that, how that fits into Todd Monken's plans for this offense, and these are fun times as UJ continues to try to grow and improve, and I guess in some cases upgrade on offense. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more about it. We'll see you then, everybody. And on video, time now for our R.S. Andrews Cooldown. And as I said off the top on our video, for those of you who are off today in honor of the MLK holiday, we really appreciate you spending some of that time with us. A day of service, I know, for many of you, and a day of reflection as well. And we're glad to know that you are taking a bit of a rest to connect with us in some Georgia football too. So we certainly appreciate that as we transition into the R.S. Andrews Cooldown. And remind you that our friends at R.S. Andrews, they can fix your furnace if your furnace is not working right. And if your furnace is not working right today, you know it. It was cold. This is the first time, I think, all year long that I had to kind of ease over some ice on the way to work. Now, it wasn't a ton of ice, but there was a little ice in the parking lot here at DawgNation World Headquarters. And so first time I've seen any kind of ice on the road, I think, all year long. So cold. That means that you got to make sure your furnace is working. rsandrews.com to make sure of that. $99 mega furnace safety check. They'll do well for you to get your heating system in working order and make sure it's safe for your family for the year to come. You can find them online at rsandrews.com. I'm going to start on YouTube today. Oftentimes it's a decision I regret, but today we're going to give the YouTube folks a chance to see what they're going on. George, the Florida fan, checking in to say he thinks that Florida will beat Georgia this year on October 31st. Well, we'll see about that. We'll find out how that goes. Rebel X says that Jameis Winston is a free agent. He is a free agent, and I'm sure he'd say some good things about his chance of working with Todd Monken a couple of years ago. What else is going on YouTube? CrowKing123 says Cream needs to get some taller cats. This is not a very big team right now. You're right about that. And there's no easier way to be turned into an average basketball team than to get handled on the offensive glass. That is certainly very true as well. But I guess I'd like to have seen a little more from Georgia. To get absolutely just ran out of the gym in Humphrey Coliseum is not exactly what you want this time of year. What else is going on? Oh, I may have to go to Facebook here for a minute. Okay, here's one from Enrique Isidro, and I hope I pronounced his last name correctly, Enrique. He says Georgia now has 5 former offensive coordinators. Will this be a case of more the merrier, or is there too much water in a small cup? Just wondering. I think it's a fair question. I think it's pretty clear who has the credentials to be the leader of this group right now. That's Todd Monken. So Luke is here. That's an example of a guy who's former offensive coordinator. Faulkner, is here now in some role, the off-field quality control assistant type role. But Todd Monken was a play caller for the Bucs 2 years ago. Was working with the Cleveland Browns this past year. Been a former head coach. Todd Monken was a candidate to be Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator, for instance. So I believe that your credentials in a room full of credentialed coaches always comes down to who had other job opportunities other places. And that's not to discredit anybody on the Georgia staff, but the person who is the alpha in the room is the person who had other rooms he could have chosen to be in. And the reason why Monken's the boss of these other guys is because Monken's the guy that could have chosen other jobs to be a part of. We are just in an era in which explosive plays are incredibly valuable. And if you're the kind of coach that knows how to design and create those explosive play opportunities, you're going to have no shortage of suitors for your employment. So that's why Monken gets to be the boss of all these guys on the offensive side of the ball, answering to Kirby, is because Monken had the most job opportunities were he not to be here at UGA. And that's kind of what that comes down to. I think it's a really good point, though, Enrique. I'm glad you shared that. All right. Is there anything else? Croaking also says that Mississippi State's incredibly tall. Yeah, not only are they tall, but, Howland's a physical coach, kind of always has been. Always has been. And obviously that's not a good matchup for Georgia. But still, 30-plus points is it. Jason Hester says, I haven't analyzed the Georgia's 2020 schedule, but I do hope that we don't have the bye week before Georgia crap going on every week like we did last year. Everyone had 2 weeks to prep for. So it'll be a little bit different this year just from the standpoint that there won't be 2 bye weeks for each team this season. Now, admittedly, I haven't seen the schedule either. At least I haven't paid that close attention to it. I don't know how many byes Georgia has. Georgia's bye is before the Florida game as per usual. So that'll be worth paying attention to. It'll be worth paying attention to. What else on Facebook? Let's find out over here for a second. You guys want to weigh in on the Buster Faulkner situation like Enrique did a moment ago? We'd love to hear from you on that. Or really anything you want to weigh in here on today. London Perry, you like the hoodie I'm wearing today? Every now and then I like to do this. I like to go cash every now and then. Ryan Elbert says, "Hey, BA, hats off to Kirby Smart for attempting to change the culture on the offensive side. This must have taken some thought over a long time. Love the humility and the willingness to change in victory. Hope Coley remains an active part as well." Yeah, obviously, I would love to see James Coley stay here because I think that Coley does have incredible recruiting value. I think that he's proven to be a great recruiter. I think that Coley's just also kind of I think institutional knowledge, institutional memory is important. The fact that Coley's been here at Georgia throughout this entire process, former offensive coordinator himself, going back to his time at Miami, there is some real value in having him here. I do. And I agree with your points on Smart as well. I tweeted about this over the weekend, that it says something nice about him, that he's willing to take what has been good, put that at risk to become even better, because there's no guarantee that anything works out in life. And the fact that he says, Georgia's missing this thing, so I'm going to take what Georgia has had, put that in jeopardy in order to try to obtain the thing that's been missing. That's just, every step towards greatness generally starts with a decision like that. Doesn't mean they always work out in that way, but every step towards greatness kind of begins with that really bold action, that really risky step. And Smart has taken that here, because what's ultimately going to happen here is there's going to be a certain loss of control. This doesn't mean that Monken doesn't answer to Smart, but Monken knows things that Smart doesn't know, because Smart has spent his time trying to battle against offenses like this. Monken has spent his time trying to conceive of these kinds of offenses. So allowing Monken to do everything he wants to do at a certain point is kind of going, I'm guessing here anyway, going beyond Smart's offensive expertise, which means that you're not in full control of that situation anymore, but relinquishing some control to have better results over, all around, to be more of a delegating CEO style head coach when it comes to the offense. I do believe that's the appropriate next step for UGA and the appropriate next step for Smart in his development as a head coach. But it would be very easy to talk yourself out of making a decision like this, because no one willingly relinquishes control. No one willingly relinquishes power unless that's just not an easy thing to get people to do. But in Smart's case, he seems to have done that willingly, which is a nice thing for him. Robert A. Smith says, with Monken and Faulkner coming on board, what exactly will Coley be doing other than recruiting in South Florida? I think it's fair to ask that question, Robert. It's also fair to point out that according to the way that he is listed at GeorgiaDogs.com, the official site, which is the official statement we're getting for now, Buster Faulkner is not listed as an on-field coach. He's listed in an analyst role. So for now, Faulkner is, I guess, lower on the food chain than Coley is, because Coley is obviously thought to still be one of the 10 coaches on this staff. Is he a quarterback's coach? Is he a tight ends coach? Is he a special teams coordinator? Is he, whatever else? There are lots of potential openings for him in that spot, reassigning other guys to go along with that. We don't really know any of that yet. We don't really know these kinds of official titles. So your question of what exactly is Coley going to do, I think that's a fair one to ask. And the answer is, as of right now, we don't know. And we probably will not know a whole lot about various responsibilities and duties on this kind of stuff. Smart just did not speak much about this last year in the changeover from Chaney to Coley, and this year likely won't speak about a whole lot of that either. And even when he does, it's likely to be kind of a mismatch type answer, because, Smart, as a for instance, kind of downplayed the transition from Chaney as a play caller to Coley, saying, well, they were all kind of, doing this a year ago, even though Chaney was clearly the offensive coordinator. Smart kind of downplayed that. So these kinds of specific reassigned duties and things like that, we will pay very close attention to all this and be watching it really, really closely. But in terms of getting a lot of definitive clarity from Smart, that's just not really been his way in the past. Tim Payne says, will the Monken hire help with our wide receiver recruiting? Yes, I do believe that it will. I think it's going to help with recruiting across the board offensively. I think it's fair to say that Georgia's brand as a recruiting power on defense is just far greater than that same brand on offense. And I think that may change now. I think that Georgia may be able to get in on just about anybody that wants on either side of the ball. the kind of offensive prowess that Georgia has a chance to be able to obtain. Now, as I said before during the regular show, I'm going to push back a little bit on the notion of the Todd Monken is going to be Georgia's version of Joe Brady. The fact of the matter is, Brady was a hotter coaching name probably than Monken was. I'm glad Georgia has Monken, but the idea that Monken's just like Joe Brady, I think the NFL, given the way in which Brady quickly became offensive coordinator with the Panthers, I think the NFL may view these guys in a slightly different category right now. But that doesn't change the fact that Monken is a really, really good hire for Georgia, even if we stop short of saying, oh, this is going to be exactly like Joe Brady. Somebody said, where can you get a hoodie like this? This is actually from our friends at Tailgate. So downtown Athens, right there in the old Harry Bissett's building is where I got this. Miriam Martin Corbin. Oh, by the way, good to have Miriam back in the comment section here today. I know Miriam's been doing a lot of different things, so nice to be able to see her here today. She says, will Hankton do a better job of developing our receivers? I wasn't very impressed with what he did last year. I can certainly understand that. He's the receivers coach. The wide receiver position for Georgia wasn't very good a year ago. I certainly appreciate all of that. I don't know how much I put at the feet of Cortez Hankton on that. I've come to believe that Hankton's a pretty important part of the Georgia coaching staff. For instance, Smart gave Cortez a lot of credit for like the Marcus Rosemary recruitment, and this is a guy that has been pretty front and center in a lot of these visits. You see those posing pictures for these visits. Hankton's a pretty prominent feature in a lot of those photos, and I think in the Rosemary case in particular, I believe Hankton's been given a good bit of credit for that. So I have always felt like when it comes to the Georgia offensive woes for this past season, while it is certainly fair to point out that the receiver group for Georgia underperformed this season, I think the way in which they've been kind of scapegoated for the entirety of the ineffectiveness of the offense, I think they've been scapegoated too much, given too big of a slice of the blame, in my opinion. So from that standpoint, I'm not going to be, I think, Miriam, as critical of Cortez as you're going to be. I'm not looking to see him replaced. I think that Cortez is a fine receivers coach. I think that obviously the Georgia receiving position needs to get better overall, and over the course of time, obviously Cortez Hankton will have a special role in that because that is that is the position that he coaches. But for the most part, I think that the failure of the Georgia offense this season was for a multitude of reasons. And I don't know that I put a ton of extra blame on Hankton alone, but I am really, really glad to have you in the comment section here today. Lucy Bowers-Boykin says, I have high hopes for a national championship this year. The one thing is true. If you can kind of maintain everything else that Georgia has and just find an offense that can be more explosive, then it's certainly reasonable to still talk about national championships. Now, it's also fair to say that in pursuit of more explosive plays offensively, you put other areas of the program at slightly more risk. Can you still run the football when you need to? Can you lean on a defense as much as you want to, given the fact that they may be back on a field a little quicker because of sometimes the pursuit of explosive plays leads to turnovers or leads to threes and out or whatever else. You do put other aspects of the program in jeopardy some when you make a big concerted push for more explosive plays offensively. But if Georgia can find a way to still be stout defensively, find a way to still be aggressive when it comes to creating a rushing offense, but also add those explosive passing plays to go with that, which other programs have successfully found a way to blend all those elements together, then it is not unreasonable to talk about Georgia as a national championship contender. A few other comments, about 2 more minutes worth, and then we are gone. And we'll let you guys get back to observing the King holiday here. Eric Bielink, and I hope I pronounced that correctly, Eric. I know I probably butchered your name. He says, pass the tight ends more. Figured Coley would have done this. So this will be a really interesting thing to observe from someone like Monken, because my theory on this, and I've obviously never been a play caller, never been a quarterback, but I think one of the reasons why you see NFL teams utilize tight end more than colleges do is because for the most part, the tight end is not going to be like read 1 or read 2 in any progression for very many college quarterbacks, because you just expect there to be a bigger and better mismatch among the receivers. In the NFL, you have quarterbacks who are kind of going through their full list of progressions a lot more, which leads to more throws for a tight end. But for the most part, even in like 4 receiver sets, a lot of the routes that you see being run, for the most part, are just window dressing. they are not really part of the progression. They are just out there to kind of keep the defense off balance, and the quarterback is looking either here or here. He's looking at a couple different options, not like 4 different options. Now, in a place like LSU, where a guy like Thaddeus Moss kind of fits the notion of a modern college tight end, he ends up catching the ball a decent amount because LSU just throwing the ball to everybody so much that everybody ends up catching the ball. So I think at a place like Georgia, if there's going to be more action for tight ends, if it's Trey McKitty, for instance, one of the ways in which that may happen is that everybody's catch number may go up. Everyone's number of big passing plays may go up, which will obviously help benefit tight ends a bit more. But for a guy like Monken, who has been in the NFL, the ability to kind of utilize, as he said before, balance is not just the ratio between run and pass, but it's also the ratio of different playmakers who get a chance to do big things. He even cited O.J. Howard in that particular clip we played near the beginning of the show. This is a guy that wants to get receivers involved, but wants to get tight ends involved as well. So that'll be fun to watch. A guy who has an NFL track record of getting tight ends involved, can you bring that to the college level? James Crump says Vandegrift or Williams are must-gets. If Mathis come back healthy, the quarterback progression will be Newman, Mathis, then Vandegrift or Williams. It'll be one to watch, and I agree with you that one way or another that Georgia's got to make the centerpiece of its 2021 class one of these really, really top-flight quarterbacks. Whether it be Williams, whether it be Vandegrift, you need one for this upcoming class. Keith Finney says, BA, it seems all the pieces are coming together now. Will Smart let them all work? I think just given this has been a very non-Smart-like offseason to me. Big, bold hire of Monken. That gets out, kind of becomes public. The Buster Faulkner thing kind of, creeps out into the universe here today. I mean, there is certainly no shortage of evidence that Georgia's working really hard to make its offense as dynamic as it possibly can be. So if you're hopeful that Smart now employs all these weapons and all this expertise at his disposal, I think this offseason gives you a reasonable chance to think that's highly possible, just given how different this offseason is playing out thus far compared to the way the one last year played out. Benevolent Zeus asked about Carson Beck. Yeah, Beck is on campus and still ready to rock and roll and going to be a part of this story in some form or fashion there as well. John Adams says about the tight end, why the tight end was underused at Georgia. One of the things that Smart has said before, John, is those tight ends do have to be matchup nightmares. They've got to be, guys who are creating that space and that separation. A lot of times that comes through speed. And, back in 2018, Georgia did use Isaac, not to the tune of 400 yards receiving, which in previous iterations of the Georgia offense was not a small total necessarily. But as far as why that didn't become a bigger part of what was going on this year, we may never know the full answer to that. Obviously, in individual moments, Eli Wolf's catch on third down at the end of the game against Florida, there were obviously key moments when tight ends were used, but certainly maybe not enough of that overall. What else is going on? We're going to get ready to go after this. John Tay Sands and the subject of Alabama fans. Yeah, listen, that Georgia-Bama matchup coming September is going to be very, very impressive indeed. Very impressive indeed. Going to be a fun one to get ready for. Anything else here? I guess just Bama fans arguing with Georgia fans right now. So let me pop back over here to Facebook and we'll get ready to go. Ro Hawkins says, with all the quarterbacks that Georgia has in place, do you think one will transfer? In this modern age, that's always going to be something more likely to happen than not. Smart's even acknowledged how hard it is to keep all these guys on campus. I guess my only opinion is it would be wrong for any of us to assume which one it's going to be. In the case of Newman, one of the reasons why I have him penciled in as the starter right now ahead of the others is because he has a track record. And a track record and experience is a very difficult thing to compete against. So if we assume that he's the guy in 2020, beyond that in 2021, it'd be wrong to make any big assumptions beyond that. Admittedly, when it comes to a guy like Brock Vandegrift, I like what he brings to the table. Same thing for a guy like Caleb Williams. I like what he brings to the table. I think they're impressive prospects. But for a guy like Mathis, for a guy like Beck, in a competition with someone like that, Stetson been a little bit too. Sometimes these competitions have a way of playing out in ways that can't quite be easily predicted. So as Georgia continues to put a lot of bodies into its quarterback competition, there's not going to be room for everyone, and quarterbacks are the position that seems like the most likely to voluntarily exit a situation like that because you can only play one quarterback at a time. But in terms of who it would be and when it would happen, that's not an easy thing to predict. And I think we should all just kind of be okay with that of, hey, let's have as many good quarterbacks in a competition as possible, and likely that'll work out for a scenario that's best for Georgia in the long run. So Georgia worked hard to recruit Mathis for the 2019 class, worked hard to bring in a guy like Beck for 2020, and now working hard to bring in at least one big name for the 2021 class. And that's just the way that it's got to be. Georgia seemingly is open with all these guys about their desire to put them into a competition, and then we'll let the best guy emerge from that and wish the other guys well to kind of do whatever's right for them beyond that. That's just kind of the way the college football is right now. And while we can assume that will happen, it's probably wrong to assume who's going to be the winner, who's going to be the one to go, and who's going to be the one to kind of move on with that next phase. That's the part where I'm not comfortable making an assumption. Keith Fold says, and this we'll finish with this for today. He says, I want to see a red streak running from Georgia to Tuscaloosa the third week in September. DawgNation invasion. Can't wait for the invasion of Tuscaloosa coming up in September. It's going to be really fun. And I guess I was also thinking about this. Now, for Alabama in September, this will be a little easier to do. But can you imagine being Virginia's defensive coaches right now, getting ready for Georgia in that first game? Like, how much film do you have to watch to feel like you know everything of what Georgia might do? Are you watching every snap that Monken's called for the Tampa Bay Bucks, going back to his time at Southern Miss, going back to his time at Oklahoma State? But I guess you still have to watch what Georgia's been doing the last couple of years because we're not quite sure yet how much of that's going to go away. I mean, can you imagine the preparation you have to do to get ready for Georgia? First game of this season, knowing you haven't seen this combination of Monken's expertise, Georgia's previous tendencies. How in the world do you get ready for all of that? That's going to be I don't know how forthcoming the Virginia staff will be, but listening to them talk about that, and really Alabama as that next kind of big game after that, listen to the Alabama staff also kind of addressing that too of, how do you get ready for Georgia knowing that they are potentially about to do something so different than's ever been done before, while also, my guess is, probably still nodding in the direction of being physical when they need to be. That is a tough offense to try to prepare for. So that'll be really, really fun as we head towards the start of the season. Virginia week 1, Alabama in September as well. And we look forward to getting a chance to talk to all of you about that right here on DawgNation Daily as well. And by the way, on the way out the door today, I'll remind you to check out AJC.com for Atlanta news now, including full coverage of everything happening around Atlanta. One of the most important days on the calendar in our city each and every day, the observance of the King holiday, big doings all throughout the city. So check in throughout the day at AJC.com for your Atlanta news now, including a whole lot more on that. And, of course, plenty on the upcoming Super Bowl and everything else that's kind of going down there as the Hawks continue their season. You can judge for yourself how successful that's been. Braves continue to work on an offseason where they need another bat. Lots of full coverage of that over at AJC.com as well. R.S. Andrews, thanks for bringing the R.S. Andrews Cooldown to us. Air, heating, plumbing, electric. You can trust them to do all of that for you because they do all of that for us. rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We will see you back here tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. for another episode of DawgNation Daily presented by Pella Window and Door. We'll look forward to talking to you then. For more DawgNation videos, check out youtube.com/DawgNation.